The Happening. Want to find out what happens when the air becomes toxin and makes you kill yourself? Watch this recap to find out. In Nick's Central Park, two friends read together, but one is startled as the other harms herself. Nearby, workers shock their manager by jumping from a construction site roof. In Philadelphia, Elliot Moore is teaching when summoned for an urgent meeting about a terrorist attack in Central Park, involving a chemical toxin. The teachers are advised to watch for signs of confusion and disorientation. Julian finds Elliot and suggests they leave the city with their families to evade the threat. Elliot confides in Julian about Alma's odd behavior, prompting Julian to disclose a secret. Alma cried on their wedding day, suggesting she wasn't ready for marriage. Elliot reaches home to find Alma watching the news about how the toxin damages the self-preservation of humans and induces people to take their own lives. After packing a few clothes for his time away, Elliot meets Julian at the station with his daughter. Julian lets him know that his wife planned to take the next train, since she was stuck in traffic, and would not make it in time for theirs. When Julian mentions that he is glad about Alma joining them, she realizes that Elliot must have told him something about their fight. She then tells Elliot that she would like to be on her own on the train, and proceeds to collect her ticket from Julian. Elliot also grabs his ticket, and the train leaves the city soon after everyone boards. Meanwhile, the toxin that was limited to Nick before gradually takes over Philadelphia as well, with multiple people choosing to shoot themselves. Upon learning of the spreading chaos, Julian contacts his wife and discovers she's en route to Princeton. Meanwhile, Alma informs Elliot about Boston's contamination. Their train unexpectedly halts in Filbert, Pennsylvania. Stranded, passengers gather at a local restaurant, where a disturbing video from Philadelphia's zoo is shared. Later, news confirms the disaster spread across the northeastern states, leaving them stranded in the heart of the crisis at Filbert. As the restaurant loses power, panic sets in, prompting an impromptu evacuation attempt to escape the toxin's reach. Elliot struggles to secure transportation for their group out of town. Luckily, a nursery owner offers them a ride. Julian, determined to reach a vet in Princeton, entrusts Jess to Elliot and Alma's care, and joins another group. The nursery owner drives them to his place to gather essentials, sharing a theory about plant chemicals causing the chaos. Meanwhile, Julian reaches Princeton, finding it heavily affected. Attempting to safeguard his group, Julian's distraction effort goes awry due to a missed car modification, leading to a fatal crash. Though Julian survives, he succumbs to the toxin's effects, tragically ending his life. Elliot's group encounters bodies on the road, prompting a detour to avoid infection. They're halted by Private Oster, who warns them of the widespread contamination. With no safe routes, they're forced to wait. More survivors arrive, including one who learns of Princeton's dire state during a call with her daughter. Tragically, the daughter's confused speech foretells her demise. Concerned for Julian and devastated by the news from Princeton, Elliot mourns the loss of his friend with Jess by his side. During a conversation with Alma, the nursery owner emphasizes that plants can emit chemicals targeting specific threats. He suggests that nature itself may be turning against humanity. Private Oster advises the group to seek a safe zone in Arundel County. Divided into smaller groups, they head there on foot. Elliot, Alma, and Jess progress cautiously with their group, while the other group, led by Private Oster and the nursery owner, falls victim to the toxin. Elliot proposes breaking into smaller groups to increase safety, focusing on staying ahead of the wind. They split into 3 groups, including 2 boys, Josh and Jared, with Elliot, Alma, and Jess remarkably unharmed. When the wind catches up, they stumble upon an abandoned vehicle. Elliot listens to a radio broadcast speculating on a nuclear leak as the cause of the attacks. Finding a map, they head towards Arundel, approximately 10 miles away, guided by newfound directions. Elliot and Alma opt for a less populated area to escape the chaos, inspired by the nursery owner's theories. Elliot humorously addresses a fake plant, realizing the entire house is a model. Concerned about encountering more survivors, they swiftly depart, discovering the house is merely a model home. As Elliot, Alma, and Jess witness another group succumb to the toxin from a distance, they swiftly move on. In a barn, they find a radio broadcasting an emergency message advising survivors to head west. Seeking food for Jess, they approach a house with boarded-up windows, but are denied entry by fearful occupants. Despite Elliot's attempts to reason with them, Josh and Jared's actions provoke gunfire. Escaping, Elliot's group resumes their search for shelter. Meanwhile, news reports speculate on the cause of the attacks, leaving people across the country in fear. Wandering through the countryside, Elliot, Alma, and Jess stumble upon Mrs. Jones, an eccentric elderly woman who offers them supper and shelter. Despite her odd demeanor and reluctance to hear about the outbreak, they gratefully accept her hospitality. As they settle in for the night, they privately discuss how to handle Mrs. Jones' eccentricities. However, when Mrs. Jones overhears them, she accuses them of ulterior motives, leaving Elliot to reassure her of their benign intentions. The next morning, Elliot wakes to find himself alone, and discovers a doll in Mrs. Jones' room. When Mrs. Jones angrily confronts him, Elliot realizes she's infected by the toxin. Hastily retreating inside, he calls for Alma. Meanwhile, Mrs. Jones succumbs to the toxin, repeatedly crashing into windows. Elliot searches for Alma and Jess, eventually finding them in the spring house across the backyard. Remembering the underground talking tube, Elliot instructs Alma to seal the door and window for safety. As they face their possible demise together, they set aside their quarrels and reminisce about their first date. Realizing they want to face the end together, Elliot leaves the house to join Alma and Jess in the backyard. Surprisingly unaffected by the toxin, they cautiously return inside, eventually realizing the toxin's effects may have subsided before they ventured out. 3 months later, Alma prepares Jess for her first day of school, while Elliot waits with her for the bus. The news discusses the event, likening it to a red tide phenomenon, suggesting rapid plant evolution as a defense mechanism against human threats. While the event lasted only 25 hours primarily in the northeastern states, experts warn it could signal a larger impending disaster for humanity. Despite the uncertainty, Alma surprises Elliot with news of her pregnancy as he returns home. While all seems to be well here, things at a Parisian park get sinister when a guy notices his friend repeating the same statement over and over again.